We are touched by the creative work of other people, transformed even. The mission or the purpose of TED is to share ideas worth sharing, but it's rarely the content or the data or the information that actually inspires. Very often, it's the process of the encounter or the process of the event that actually is in itself inspiring. We are touched, in a sense, by the affect that is co-created by the listeners and the speakers. We are touched by the presence of others and by the presence of ideas. One of the things that we do when we touch other people is we lay our hands on them, or we feel their skin, or we make contact with them in some way. But we are also touched by their presence without direct contact. We are also aware of the atmosphere that they bring with them. Books also bring this atmosphere. But the power of presence is one of the most indefinable things that we know, and also one of the most under-discussed or under-understood aspects of how we relate. Indeed, the writer Maya Angelou said that she has learnt, very importantly, that while people may forget what you said, people may forget what you did, they will never forget how you made them feel. Books also make us feel. And those of you who are in book clubs or involved in any type of discussion group centered around art or artistic practices will be very well aware that the discussions are primarily and usually about how the book made the reader feel, or not, whether or not the book touched us or not, or whether that touch was welcome or not, because of course, all touch is not well received. We use phrases like, it got under my skin, it maddened me, it was navel-gazing, it left me cold, it took me over. And this sort of language and these words cue us into the fact that we're talking about, in many ways, the book as if it is an organism or as if it is a body. That we are addressing somehow the idea that the book exerts some sort of pressure on us. We use phrases that illustrate how we feel it coming towards us in some way. It moved me. It took me over. I was swept away by it. We also use phrases to describe how it gets away from us. I wasn't able to get a grip on it. I couldn't quite get a hold of what it was about. Or we use phrases to talk about the fact that it came too close to us. It was too in your face, or it was too up front. So that question of proximity and distance in terms of presence is very important in terms of thinking about how we relate to art and artistic practices. Now, these bodily metaphors and this way of thinking, is this simply the sum of our own projections that we put onto objects? Or is it something that is actually real? In other words, are these simply figures of speech, or is there a figure in the speech? After all, creative writers talk about the fact that they too get taken over in the process of writing or making art or making art. They talk about the book writing itself or the picture painting itself, of being moved by a force, of the characters living with them during the process. So they talk about the fact that they themselves are also somehow or the other subject to something that is flowing through them. This notion of something that's flowing through the writer is very interesting And it's one of the things, and flows through the reader in certain ways, that we sense when we approach a book. And the writer is transformed by the experience of the production of the book, in the same way that the reader may or may not be transformed, consciously or unconsciously. Now, to think about this a little bit more, and to think about the question of that encounter, I'd just like to look at the word transform. And it's broken into two parts, or it's got two sort of roots. One is the word across, which is to go from one side to another. And the other is formere, or to form, which is to make a shape, a mold, or a body. So to go across from one side to another is to go over a boundary, or to cross a line in a way. And to make a shape or a mold is to create something new. So to transform is the act of crossing a boundary in the making of something new. The very first body that we change or exchange in a way is, or the very first line that we cross, at least in our human existence, is our mother's body for our own. We become individuated when we leave that body and cross that line. That is our first form in a way, and it is always in transformation, because the mother's body is growing as she accommodates the growing child, just as the child within is growing and developing, both as its own cells replicate and as it animates itself with its own spirit through the structures and the form and the support network of the mother. The mother's neurochemistry literally flows through the child. Her oxygen, her breath, her life is that flowing through that originary transformation. And it is this story of transformation, this story of the primary movement from being part of a transform, of being part of a structure that is larger, that is recounted with such power in Emma Donoghue's beautifully written, pitch perfect, and critically acclaimed 2010 novel Room. I'm going to come back to transform, but just briefly, for those of you who haven't read Room or know about Emma Donoghue, I'd just like to introduce them briefly. Emma Donoghue is at this stage a writer of international significance. She was born in Dublin in 1969, and she lives in Canada now with her wife and her 2 children. Room is her 7th novel, and it is loosely based, or loosely inspired, in her own words, by the horrific story of the escape of the Fritzl family from their dungeon in Austria. It is narrated from the point of view of a 5-year-old boy called Jack, who lives in a shed, a 12-foot by 12-foot shed with his mother, and they are the prisoners of his biological father, old Nick, who is also his mother's captor. The mother has transformed this shed into a loving and an imaginative space for him. And the novel recounts the richness of their inner life there, which also stands in as a metaphor for the womb and for the developing relationship between mother and child there, and then recounts how they escaped and adjusted to living in a structure with more than one room. Also a metaphor for the growing attachments of social complexity when we move out of that original bond, that original relationship, into bringing other people, attaching ourselves to other people and making other relationships. These transformations are so powerful that writers and other commentators have commented again and again about how the novel itself has transformed them. And Audrey Niffenegger wrote that it is a book to read in one sitting. When it's over, you look up. The world looks the same, but you are somehow different, and that feeling lingers for days. Equally, writers and commentators have noted how it takes a story of violence and abuse and turns it into something healing and restorative. And the word that is repeated is radiance and radiant. So something luminous happens here, which doesn't divert us from the violence and the abuse, but suggests models for healing and mending. And what are those models, and what is it that Ma, Jack's mother, does that provides such creative and enabling relating? Well, one of the things that she does is she, in changing the inner world, the inner landscape of the shed into this beautiful, or beautiful is too strong a word in this case, into this emotionally beautiful space for herself and Jack, is she uses the stories and materials that are available to her through creative play and through naming a landscape for him that is full of magic kingdoms and geographies of, cliffs and crevices and special places under tables, under chairs, behind beds, so that even in this restricted place, his imagination can roam. She makes good use of the very few books they have there, one of which is Alice in Wonderland, and the other story that captures his imagination is that of his namesake, Jack and the Beanstalk. She takes their rubbish and she makes toys from it. She makes fort, she makes labyrinth, and she makes egg snake out of broken eggshells. So she takes what has been thrown out and turns it into something, ecologically recycles it into something that can rebuild a world in the middle of that horror. But one of the things that's really interesting about the novel is that it doesn't simply write about, or the toys are not simply toys that or the stories aren't simply about transformation. Jack's favourite toy is, our favourite character from Dora the Explorer is Switchy Star, because it can change to all shapes. He moves from being Jack the boy hero to being Jack the giant. So he is always changing shape and size, imaginatively refitting himself for his world and for his growing psychic development. Alice in Wonderland is, of course, a book about changing shape, about getting bigger and smaller, about fitting and not fitting your environment, and about trying to find a way that you can relate in strange landscapes. Switchy Star can change to all shapes. So while Jack and the Beanstalk and Alice in Wonderland are about transformations, the toys are also, the toys that he makes with his mother and that he encounters after he escapes also embody transformation, like Switchy Star. When he leaves a room, when he escapes, he comes across the cool toys in the dentist's office. And that included a book about Transformers and another one with no jacket about mutant turtles that say no to drugs. We only have to look at these to think about how they echo the transformation from womb to birth. The transformer shape in its original form is like a car or some kind of vehicle that is rounded or has this sort of shape, and then it unfolds to become a figure, an upright figure. The mutant turtles are in a constant state of emerging from their womb-like shell. Equally, the locational toys that he encounters when he leaves room mediate that relationship or mediate that transformation from womb to world. Jack sits at the top of a slide, terrified to go down it in a little hut, scared to go down the birth canal because the world is overwhelming and he has an anxiety about learning to cope where there is so much sensory input. With coaxing and support, he learns to do it. Playgrounds are obviously ways in which children learn to negotiate the overwhelming, at times, sensory input of the world. They learn to spin, to squeeze through tunnels, all the little listening devices, the swinging. But there is a possibility that they may also be about mediating the memory of leaving, of actually making, laying down the patterns and the knowing and the knowledge of that very first transformation. His formal play, Jack's formal play with his counsellor, Dr. Clay, is facilitated through painting and writing. And his Dr. Clay's name, of course, suggests the very malleability that's needed to mould his new reality. He paints pictures about his new environment to try and own it and to try and symbolize it. He uses Lego to symbolize attachments, new family relationships that are defined not by ownership and control, as in the case of old Nick, but by love and by choice. Lego is also used as well to symbolize a wider environment, that all of these growing attachments and more complex social systems, structures, and modes of relating in wider culture. So these toys are all there used to symbolize this ongoing transformation. But one of the things that's key to understanding what is so transformative, or what has such a powerful effect in this novel, is that it asks us or invites us to see like Jack. We're asked to see shapes. We're asked to see, we're asked to listen very carefully to what it is he hears. And we're asked to see toys and toys at work. We're asked to see the symbols in his pictures. He argues, or he says, I'm a human, but I'm a me and ma as well. I don't know a name for us, rumors. So we're invited to see something that we're rarely invited to see. We focus on the individual. We focus on the integrity and on the uniqueness of individual people. But there is a part of us that will always be a rumor, that will always carry with us that form that becomes ever elaborated in various structures throughout our lives. While old Nick's womb was a death-dealing place, static, non-transformative, Ma began to decompose in it. The room that was created with Ma and her son was transformative and healing. I thank you for your kind attention.